High school isn't easy for anyone, but for me, it was like walking through a minefield every day. I was a sophomore at Mill Creek High, a quiet, awkward kid who kept to himself. I didn't play sports, I wasn't in any clubs, and my name only came up when teachers took attendance. That's probably why I caught the attention of the seniors. It started small, snickering when I walked by, whispers behind my back, the occasional shove in the hallways. Harmless stuff, or at least that's what I told myself. But then came the rumors. "Hey, I heard Jeremy thinks he's better than us," one of them said loudly in the cafeteria, making sure I heard. "Thinks we're scared of him," another chimed in, laughing. I didn't react. I'd learned that showing any emotion only made it worse. But ignoring them didn't make them go away. If anything, it made them try harder. By the time Christmas rolled around, I thought I'd made it through the worst. Winter break was just days away, and I was counting down the hours until I could spend 2 blissful weeks at home, away from school and the seniors who seemed to delight in tormenting me. But on December 22nd, everything changed. It was the last day of classes before break, and the school was buzzing with holiday excitement. I stayed late that day to work on a group project in the library. My group had left hours earlier, but I needed to finish my part. By the time I packed up and left, the halls were empty. Or so I thought. As I headed toward the main doors, I noticed something strange. All the lights in the hallway leading to the exit were off, except for the very last one. Underneath it was a folded piece of paper taped to a locker. My name was scrawled on it in thick black marker. My stomach sank. Against my better judgment, I walked over and took the note. It was written in messy block letters. "Meet us in the gym. Don't chicken out." I knew exactly who us was, but I also knew what would happen if I didn't go. The seniors would make my life even worse than it already was. The gym was dark when I got there, except for a single flashlight sitting on the bleachers. Its beam illuminated a spot in the middle of the court where a chair had been placed. "Jeremy!" a voice called out, echoing through the empty space. I froze. "Don't be shy. Sit down." I couldn't see who was talking, but I recognized the voice. It was Brad, the ringleader of the seniors. "Let's get this over with," I muttered, walking toward the chair. My hands were sweating, and my heart was racing, but I kept my face blank. As soon as I sat down, I felt zip ties tighten around my wrists and ankles. I hadn't even seen them coming. "What the hell?" I shouted, struggling against the restraints. "Relax," Brad said, stepping into the light. He was grinning, his teeth white and predatory. "It's just a little Christmas tradition." The others emerged from the shadows, all of them wearing masks. Cheap plastic ones that looked like they'd been bought at a dollar store. One was Santa, another a reindeer, and the rest were elves. "Let me go," I yelled, but they just laughed. They started circling me, their voices taunting and mocking. "We heard you're scared of the dark," one of them said. "Good thing it's not dark in here," Brad added, flicking off the flashlight. I was plunged into complete darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I could hear them moving around me, their footsteps echoing on the gym floor. "Boo!" one of them shouted from behind me. I flinched, and they burst into laughter. Then they started making noises, growls, whispers, scratching sounds. It was stupid, childish stuff, but in the dark, tied to that chair, it felt like the walls were closing in. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Ah, is little Jeremy scared?" Brad's voice was right next to my ear. Something wet and sticky splattered across my face. "What is that?" I screamed, thrashing against the zip ties. "Relax," Brad said. "It's just ketchup." I heard the click of a lighter and saw a small flame flicker to life. It illuminated Brad's face for just a second before he used it to ignite something on the floor. "You're insane," I screamed as the fire roared to life. The heat was intense, and the smoke stung my eyes. They stood just outside the ring of flames, laughing and pointing. "Looks like you're on Santa's naughty list," one of them shouted. Then the fire alarm went off. The sprinklers activated, dousing the flames and soaking all of us. Brad cursed under his breath, and the others scattered. The gym doors burst open, and Principal Harris stormed in, followed by the janitor and a security guard. "What the hell is going on here?" Harris demanded. The seniors tried to talk their way out of it, but the evidence was everywhere. The zip ties, the masks, the burned circle on the gym floor. They were dragged to the principal's office, and I was untied and sent home. Over the next few days, the story spread like wildfire. The seniors were suspended and later expelled. Their college acceptances were rescinded, and their parents had to pay for the gym repairs. As for me, I became something of a school legend. Everyone wanted to know what happened, but I didn't want to talk about it. The truth was, I still woke up some nights smelling smoke and hearing their laughter. Some scars don't fade, even after the fire's out. I still remember the feeling in the pit of my stomach that day. It was a cold December afternoon, just a few days before winter break. Snow flurries had started falling, and the holiday decorations on the lampposts outside Ridgewood Middle School sparkled under the gray sky. I was 13 at the time, a shy 8th grader who always tried to fly under the radar. My routine was simple: walk to school in the morning, head home in the afternoon, and spend the rest of the evening either studying or texting my friends. That day was supposed to be no different, but it was. Classes ended at 3:15, and I stayed after school to finish a project in the art room. My teacher, Mrs. Barker, let me stay while she graded papers at her desk. By the time I packed up my things, it was almost 4:30, and the hallways were deserted. "Be careful walking home, Lydia," Mrs. Barker called as I left. "It's getting dark early." I nodded, pulling my coat tighter around me. The schoolyard was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic on the main road. Most of the kids had gone home long ago, and the buses were gone. As I walked toward the gate, I noticed a man standing on the sidewalk across the street. He looked out of place. He wasn't dressed for the cold, just a thin jacket and jeans. He had a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He wasn't moving, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, watching the school. I hesitated. My parents had drilled stranger danger into me since I was little, and every instinct told me to turn around and go back inside. But I didn't want to look paranoid, and I wasn't even sure he was watching me. Maybe he was waiting for someone. I walked quickly, my boots crunching on the icy sidewalk. The gate was only a few yards away, and beyond it was the main road where I could blend in with the other pedestrians. But as I got closer, the man stepped off the curb and crossed the street, heading directly toward the gate. My heart started racing. I stopped walking, so did he. Our eyes met, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "You go to school here?" I didn't answer. "Hey, wait up," he called, quickening his pace. Panic surged through me. I spun around and ran back toward the school doors. My boots slipped on the icy pavement, but I didn't stop. "Wait!" he shouted again, louder this time. I yanked the door open and bolted inside, letting it slam shut behind me. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto my bag. I turned the lock on the door and peered through the small window. He was standing at the gate now, staring after me. His hands were out of his pockets, and he looked angry. I ran down the hallway to the main office, praying someone was still there. Mrs. Barker and the school secretary, Ms. Daniels, were standing by the copier. They looked up in surprise when I burst in. "There's a man outside," I gasped. "He was following me." Mrs. Barker's face went pale. She grabbed the phone and called the police. We all stood by the window, peeking through the blinds. The man hadn't left. He was pacing near the gate, his breath visible in the cold air. It felt like hours before the police arrived, though it was probably only 10 minutes. 2 squad cars pulled up, their lights flashing. The man froze, then turned and started walking away, but the officers were faster. I watched as they caught up to him and pinned him against the hood of the car. "Do you know him?" one of the officers asked me when they came inside. I shook my head. Another officer found a knife in the man's jacket pocket and zip ties in his backpack. My stomach turned as I realized what could have happened if I hadn't run. The police asked me questions for what felt like forever, but I barely heard them. My mind kept replaying the moment when our eyes met and the way he'd started following me. The man was arrested, and the next day, my parents told me he'd been charged with attempted kidnapping. Apparently, he'd been lurking near schools for weeks, looking for a victim. I still walk home from school, but I'm never alone anymore. My parents insisted on getting me a phone, and I always have it in my hand, ready to call for help if I ever need to. I don't think I'll ever forget the man's face or the way he looked at me that day. But more than anything, I'm grateful that I listened to my instincts and ran. That decision might have saved my life. I was in my junior year of high school, and it was just another ordinary Wednesday. The bell rang for third period, and I made my way to the history classroom. Normally, Mr. Carter taught this class, an older guy with a gruff voice and a strict demeanor. But when I walked in that day, he wasn't there. Instead, there was a substitute. She was young, probably mid-20s, and looked like she was trying too hard to appear authoritative. Her name was written on the board in neat, looping letters: Ms. Hensley. I took my seat near the middle of the room, surrounded by the usual chatter of classmates who were thrilled about having a sub. Everyone knew substitutes meant an easy class period. "Settle down," Miss Hensley said, her voice soft but trying to sound firm. She passed out a stack of worksheets and told us they were from Mr. Carter. Simple enough. Fill in the blanks about the Revolutionary War, hand it in at the end of the class. At first, everything seemed normal. The room was quieter than usual as we worked, but about 20 minutes in, something felt off. I noticed it first in the way she kept glancing at the door. Every few minutes, her eyes darted over like she was expecting someone to walk in. She also had a nervous energy about her, tapping her pen on the desk, shifting in her chair, and rubbing the back of her neck. I thought maybe she was just new to teaching, nervous about managing a rowdy class of high school juniors. But then, something else caught my attention. She wasn't sitting at Mr. Carter's desk. She was at one of the student desks, positioned near the front, like she didn't want to be too obvious. And when one of the students asked to use the bathroom, she hesitated before saying yes, almost like she didn't want anyone leaving the room. About halfway through the period, there was a knock at the door. Ms. Hensley jumped, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "It's probably just the janitor," someone joked, making the class laugh. But Ms. Hensley didn't laugh. She walked to the door, opened it just a crack, and peeked out. Whoever was on the other side spoke too quietly for us to hear, but her face turned pale. She muttered something in response, then closed the door quickly and locked it. By now, the class had picked up on her unease. Whispers started spreading, and the room filled with that strange, buzzing tension that happens when everyone knows something's wrong, but no one wants to say it out loud. "Is everything okay?" one of the braver students, Derek, finally asked. Miss Hensley forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Everything's fine. Just focus on your work." The room went silent again, but no one was focusing on the worksheets anymore. I could feel my own pulse quickening, my mind racing through possibilities. Who had been at the door? Why was she so on edge? A few minutes later, There was another knock. This one was louder. Ms. Hensley didn't move. "Who is it?" Derek called out, but Ms. Hensley shot him a glare that made him shrink back in his seat. She walked to the door again, this time standing off to the side as she peered through the little window. Her whole body stiffened. "Everyone stay in your seats," she said, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" another student asked, the fear now obvious in their tone. Ms. Hensley didn't answer. She grabbed her phone and stepped into the corner of the room, dialing quickly. Her voice was low, but I caught snippets of her conversation. "He's here. I told you. No, I locked it. What do I do?" The room was dead silent now. Everyone was frozen, eyes darting between each other and the door. And then, suddenly, the doorknob rattled. Ms. Hensley dropped the phone. She turned toward us, her face pale and her hands shaking. "Move to the back of the room," she said, her voice urgent. We didn't need to be told twice. Chairs scraped against the floor as we scrambled to the farthest corner, ducking behind desks and cabinets. The rattling stopped, but a second later, there was a loud, heavy bang against the door. Whoever was outside was trying to get in. Miss Hensley grabbed her phone again, frantically redialing. "He's trying to break in. Hurry!" The bangs grew louder, more forceful. Each one sent a jolt through my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence was almost worse. Minutes felt like hours as we huddled together, waiting. Finally, we heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. A few minutes later, there was shouting in the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of police officers giving commands. When it was over, an officer knocked on the door and identified himself. Miss Hensley unlocked it, her hands still shaking. The man outside was someone she knew, an ex-boyfriend who had been stalking her for months. She hadn't told the school because she thought he wouldn't find her there. But he had. The police took him away, and Miss Hensley broke down in tears. The rest of us were sent home early, still shaken but relieved it hadn't ended worse. That day taught me something I'll never forget. Danger can show up when you least expect it, even in a place where you think you're safe. And sometimes, it's the people who seem the most in control who are fighting the biggest battles. High school is supposed to be the best years of your life, or so they say. For me, sophomore year was anything but. It wasn't like I was a complete outcast or anything, but I wasn't popular either, just one of those quiet kids who flew under the radar. That year, however, I found myself on someone's radar, and not in a good way. His name was Jason Harper, a senior, built like a linebacker, and known for making life hell for anyone he decided was beneath him. Unfortunately, I became his target after a stupid misunderstanding in the cafeteria. I accidentally bumped into him while carrying my lunch tray, spilling some food on his jeans. I apologized profusely, but he just stared at me, his face cold and unreadable. "Watch yourself," he said, his voice low and menacing. I should have known that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks, Jason made my life miserable. It started small, snide comments in the hallways, mocking me in front of my classmates. But then it escalated. He'd shove me into lockers, accidentally knock my books out of my hands, and even corner me in the bathroom just to intimidate me. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not the teachers, not even my best friend, Aaron. I didn't want to look weak, and honestly, I was scared of what Jason might do if he found out I'd ratted him out. But one Friday afternoon, things took a darker turn. It was after school, and I'd stayed late to work on a history project in the library. By the time I packed up and headed to my locker, the halls were almost empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. As I reached my locker, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned around, and there he was, Jason, He had two of his goons with him, both of them grinning like this was some kind of game. "Working late, huh?" Jason said, leaning against the locker next to mine. I didn't respond. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. "Not gonna talk to me?" he said, stepping closer. "That's rude, you know?" I tried to sidestep him, but one of his buddies blocked my path. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice shaky. Jason laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" Before I could react, he grabbed the front of my hoodie and slammed me against the locker. Pain shot through my back, and I gasped. "See, I think you've got an attitude problem," Jason said, his face inches from mine. "And I think it's time someone taught you a lesson." That's when I saw it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. It wasn't huge, but it was sharp enough to make my blood run cold. "Jason, come on, man," one of his friends said, his grin fading. "We're just messing around." "Shut up," Jason snapped, not taking his eyes off me. I was frozen. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do, but all I could focus on was the blade glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Scared," Jason said, smirking. "You should be." "Hey!" The voice came from down the hall. We all turned to see Mr. Caldwell, the janitor, standing there with a mop in one hand and a radio in the other. Jason let go of me and slipped the knife back into his pocket, but it was too late. Mr. Caldwell had seen everything. "Get out of here, all of you," Mr. Caldwell shouted, his voice echoing through the hallway. Jason and his buddies took off, disappearing around the corner. "Are you okay?" Mr. Caldwell asked, rushing over to me. I nodded, though my legs felt like jelly. "You're coming with me," he said, leading me to the principal's office. The next day, Jason was gone. I later found out that Mr. Caldwell had reported the incident, and the school had called the police. Jason was expelled, and charges were filed against him for bringing a weapon to school. For a while, I was terrified he'd come after me, but he never did. Apparently, his parents sent him to some kind of boot camp for troubled teens, and that was the last I ever heard of him. Looking back, I still get chills thinking about how close I came to real danger that day. But more than anything, I learned the importance of speaking up. If Mr. Caldwell hadn't been there, who knows how things might have ended. Sometimes the people we're most afraid of are just bullies trying to act tough. But other times there's something far worse. It happened when I was a junior in high school, just a few days before Christmas break. Our school was buzzing with excitement over the upcoming holidays, but I was mostly focused on keeping my grades up. That day started like any other. A brisk morning in Wisconsin, snow crunching under my boots as I hurried to make it to homeroom on time. The first 3 periods flew by. By the time 4th period rolled around, the air felt different, heavier somehow. It wasn't something I could explain. Maybe it was the way the hallways seemed quieter than usual, or how some teachers were whispering near the faculty lounge. I brushed it off and headed to my locker to grab my textbook for history class. Just as I was shutting the locker door, the fire alarm blared. It wasn't a drill. I knew that because the school never scheduled drills this late in the semester. "Come on, line up," our history teacher, Mr. Grayson, shouted above the noise as students filed into the hallway. The procedure was drilled into us from kindergarten. No running, stay with your class, head to the designated evacuation spot outside. The freezing air hit us hard as we gathered in the snowy field behind the school. Most of us were underdressed, shivering in our hoodies and sneakers. Teachers were doing head counts, but something wasn't right. Students were murmuring, glancing at the building, where no smoke or flames were visible. "False alarm," Jenna, a classmate, asked, rubbing her arms for warmth. "Probably," I replied, though I wasn't convinced. The teachers looked too tense. After what felt like an eternity, Principal Marsh approached the group with a megaphone. "Students, we're going to be here for a little while longer. Please remain with your classes. Your safety is our priority." Safety? The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Something was wrong. About 15 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing. Officers went straight into the building without talking to the principal. That's when the rumors started spreading. "I heard someone called in a bomb threat," one kid whispered. "No way," another replied. "It's probably just some prank." But the tension in the air said otherwise. I noticed teachers herding us farther from the building, their faces pale and serious. As the minutes ticked by, my anxiety grew. It didn't help that I saw an unmarked van arrive next, more officers piling out, their expressions grim. The whispers around me grew louder, more frantic. "Did you see the SWAT team?" someone muttered behind me. "I think they found something inside," another said. Finally, Principal Marsh returned, her face tight. "Students, you'll be dismissed for the day. Buses are arriving early, and anyone who drives will be escorted to the parking lot. Please head to your transportation quickly and calmly." We didn't need to be told twice. As I boarded the bus, I couldn't stop glancing at the building. Police officers were still moving in and out, some carrying equipment I couldn't identify. My heart pounded as the bus pulled away, and the school faded into the distance. The next day, the story broke on the local news. A suspicious bag had been found in the boys' locker room. It contained makeshift explosives. Thankfully, they hadn't been detonated. The police had received a tip from a student who noticed someone acting strange earlier that morning. It turned out the person responsible was a former student, expelled 2 years prior for fighting. He'd slipped into the building through a back entrance, likely planning to leave the bag and disappear. His motives were unclear, but he'd been arrested after being spotted on security footage leaving the school grounds. I didn't sleep much that night. All I could think about was how close we'd come to disaster. The image of the police and SWAT officers stayed burned into my mind for weeks. What scared me most wasn't the bag itself, but how easy it had been for someone to get into the school unnoticed. Even now, years later, I can't hear a fire alarm without feeling a spike of panic. What if it's not just a drill? What if it's something worse? Some memories, no matter how much time passes, never stop haunting you.